So, you guys might have heard that the 2023 draft class is way better than 2022 or 2021. There's a ton of hype in this draft class, and I haven't seen that many players that are eligible for this year, and I definitely haven't been paying close attention to the vast majority of them. But I can say this about the 2023 draft class. I don't know if it's going to have the crazy depth that a lot of people are saying it will. But the top end talent is definitely there. Today, I'm going to go over a few of those guys that right now are projected to go towards the top and some of the very top guys in the 2023 draft class. So if that sounds good to you guys, be sure to stick around to the end of the video to learn about some guys that you should be keeping your eye on for the 2023 draft. Okay, the first player here is the player that I so far am the least excited about, but that could definitely change as we get closer to the draft and the 2022-23 season actually starts and we start seeing how these guys are playing in their draft season. But that being said, Will Smith is definitely already still a very good prospect. He's listed at 6 foot 172, so he's got some size already. And remember, guys, these guys are basically still draft -1, so there will be time for these guys to get a little bit bigger. And let's take a look at some of his stats from this season. In the U.S. National Team Development Program, he was over a point per game in the U17 program, and then he graduated to the U18 program where he scored 27 points in 28 games. So the US NDTP program is stacked, and they basically just have a bunch of draft eligible guys and guys that will get drafted every single year. But to score at a point per game, essentially, as a draft -1 guy in the U18 program is pretty impressive, especially considering this guy is definitely not getting as much ice time as all the draft year guys are. Like, think of guys like Logan Cooley, for example. Cooley's obviously going to be playing a much more prominent role on that U18 team than a guy like Will Smith would have been last year. But a lot of those guys are moving on, either potentially to the NHL or to college or wherever they're going. But that leaves room for Will Smith and the rest of the draft eligible players for the 2023 class to take up a more prominent role. And Will Smith is definitely a guy I'm really excited about and a guy that you guys should be keeping your eye on for the 2023 draft class. Okay, the next player I want to talk about here is Finnish forward Casper Halttunen. Now, this is a guy, I will admit, I have not seen Halttunen play at all. Or maybe I have. If I have, it was randomly and I wasn't really paying attention for him. He did play at the U18s, though, and had 5 points in 6 games. So I definitely did see him there, actually. I just don't specifically recall watching specifically for him. Obviously, I was really focusing on the draft eligible guys like Brad Lambert. But in the Finnish U20 league this year, he had 38 points in 41 games, which is pretty impressive. It's not a league that I watch a ton of. It's not a league that is really potentially easy to watch. Next season, look for him to be playing in the Liga, which is an easier league to watch if you are in North America. There are ways of seeing Liga games if you're really determined to do so. One thing that does stand out to me on this page, though, he did have 75 penalty minutes in 41 games played. That is a little bit troubling. I don't mind guys that take a lot of penalties, but they do generally tend to underperform their draft position, historically speaking. And I will say he is a big boy. He's 6'3", 192 pounds. And again, he's probably going to get bigger. This is a guy who could be 6'4", 6'5", easily eclipsing 200 pounds in his draft year, which is a little bit unusual for forwards, especially if he's a winger. If he plays center at that size, that is a little bit a little bit more typical for wingers. It comes around every once in a while, like Uri Slafkovsky, of course, is 6'4", but I suspect his size may be playing into how many penalty minutes he's taking. He definitely has the body to play that kind of physical, aggressive guy who's just a bit of a pest. Again, I haven't seen him play, so I'd have to really watch him to determine if that's exactly what's going on there. If it is, that's fine. If that's the style he plays, he could be, kind of like a Brad Marchand type player if his production holds up. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case, given his production as an underager in U20, because it is a U20 league. So he was 16 and 17, mostly would have been 16 years old this season, playing against mostly 18 to 20-year-olds. So having a point per game, playing against older competition like that is pretty impressive, although his size definitely would have been helping him out in that regard. The next player I want to talk about here is Leo Carlsson, and this is another player that I haven't seen too much of. Now, don't worry, guys, there are most of the rest of the players on this list I have seen play. Some of them I've seen play quite a bit, and I suppose there's a little bit of bias there. The guys that I've seen more, I say ranked higher, but it's not. This isn't really a rankings video, but I am more excited for those guys, I suppose. And this is another guy who's big. He's listed as a center, 6'3", 185. So let's go ahead and check out his production. He played in the SHL this year as a 16-year-old. Let's see. He turned 17 on December 26th. So he was playing at J20. He did play 14 games at J20 this season, so maybe he didn't get into the SHL until after he turned 17. But either way, playing in the SHL as a 17-year-old, putting up 9 points in 35 games, that is extremely impressive. Now, again, a large part of that is going to be down to his size. 6'3", 185 is very large for a kid of his size, so he has that physical maturity in his game already. But that does give him an advantage as he's able to focus on really refining his game from an earlier age. This is a guy who's likely going to play in the SHL next season for possibly the whole year, especially considering he played 35 games already this year. Look for him to increase on that production. If this is a guy that puts, 20 to 30 points as a draft eligible in the SHL, you could be looking at kind of historical production, maybe not best ever, but amongst the best ever for draft eligible players out of the SHL. So definitely a guy to keep your eye on. And I will certainly be watching him quite a bit this upcoming season. Okay, the next player I want to talk about here is a player that I have seen quite a bit this season in Mikhail Gulyayev. And apparently it's just impossible to get photographs of these guys from the OMS program over in Russia. And the reason I have seen this guy, of course, is he was teammates with Gleb Trikazov, one of my top 10 guys ranked in the 2022 draft. And although I wasn't specifically taking notes on Gulyayev, this is what I could say about him. He is definitely capable of running a top power play unit. At least at the MHL level, I thought he played that role pretty well. I think he's a very good passer, has good visions has good vision to create dangerous scoring chances, especially on the power play. Pretty creative passer, but also kind of just makes the smart play a lot of the times. Now, he didn't completely blow me out of the water when I was watching him. Again, though, I was mostly watching Gleb Trikazov. He did have 35 points, 28 assists in 54 games at the MHL this season, and 5 assists in 13 playoff games. I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, 2 of those assists in the playoffs came in the same game, where I thought he was a very dominant player. I believe he was in the second or possibly third rounds of the playoffs. But he had a very, very good performance in that one specific game. And even though, again, I don't remember specific details of his game, he is a very good offensive defenseman. you do have to take into consideration the level of play that occurs in the MHL. This is a knock against players like Gleb Trikazov. Some people might have had, well, the MHL isn't a very good league. And that is true. Now, I did watch all the games that I watched from Trikazov and this team would have been in the playoffs last year. I watched 8 of their 13 games. And so you're going to have better competition in the playoffs, right? You're basically having the best teams play each other. So I didn't really see any of that disparity between teams, right? Sometimes you have a really good team and a really bad team, especially in the league like the NHL, play each other, and guys might put up a ton of points, but it's not really that impressive because they're going up against really poor competition. Now, I will say, even in the playoffs, the goaltending in the NHL in general just isn't that great, so it tends to be a bit high scoring. But, 5 points in the 13 games. I believe he had 4 of those in the 8 games that I watched. Not too bad. He didn't blow me away, but nothing really stood out as a major flaw to me as well. He is listed at 5'10", 170, but I will say that his size did not strike me as a concern. He didn't seem like a particularly small player out there. And again, he will have another year to grow. Perhaps he hits 5'11", 6 foot. And if he could hit that 6 foot mark, I don't think anybody's going to be calling him really an undersized defenseman. A little bit like Vladimir Grudinin, who went this year, was also 5'10". But I believe he was also listed at lower than 170 pounds. And if you saw any of my videos where I talked about Grudinin, you would know that I didn't think he would have like extremely severe small player problems in the NHL. And Gulyayev is another player who I don't think is going to have those problems, especially if he can add a couple more inches and, 20 more pounds before he's playing in the NHL. The next player I want to watch is one guy that I have actually seen quite a bit this season, and that is Braden Yager. He is a forward. I believe he primarily played as a center for the Michkov Warriors this season, listed at 6 foot, 161 pounds. So he does already have NHL level height. He does need to build on that, though. 161 is quite thin for a guy of that height. But I thought he was very impressive this season. He had 59 points in 63 games, 7 points in 10 playoff games. So basically right around a point per game as a draft -1 guy is quite impressive in general. But kind of like his teammate Jagger Firkus, I thought he has quite the shot. It's perhaps not quite as good as Firkus's, but he still has a full another year to develop and improve on his shot if he so desires. I also think his playmaking is a bit underrated. He only had 25 assists in 63 games this season, but I thought a lot of his passes were going into or coming from high danger areas, or high danger or medium danger areas, which is a really good sign. Those are generally areas that have more projectable scoring. So if your passes are going into high danger areas, obviously you have a higher chance of scoring. So I like to see players attempt passes into those areas or from those areas of the ice. And Yager was definitely a guy who was doing that. I also thought he had really, really good chemistry with Jagger Firkus. I thought those two guys played together a fair amount, and I thought that they complemented each other really well. They seems to be on the same page pretty much all the time. So if this is a guy who potentially could is available when when Seattle is picking, maybe tempting pick for Seattle there. But either way, wherever he goes, I think Yager is likely going to be, if not in the top 10, definitely in the first round of the 2023 draft class. The next player I want to talk about here is another guy that unfortunately I haven't really seen play this season, but that is Dalibor Dvorsky. Now, Dvorsky is another Slovakian player playing in the Swedish J20 League primarily this season, or this past season, I should say. Listed at 6'1", 190 pounds. So there's a bit of a common thing here with these guys, especially amongst the forwards. These guys do have size, which does give them an advantage in their draft -1 seasons, as they are a bit more physically mature than a lot of the other draft -1 guys, which generally makes the game a little bit easier for them. Now, he had 40 points in 33 games at the J20 level this year, 6 points in 6 playoff games, which is pretty impressive. Doesn't totally blow me away, but if those were numbers he put up in a draft year, those are definitely numbers still worth drafting, probably in the top 2 rounds of most drafts. He also had 3 points in 17 games in the Hockey Allsvenskan League, which is not as impressive, especially compared to a guy like Leo Carlsson, who had 9 points in the SHL. For those of you who don't know, Hockey Allsvenskan is basically the second tier of professional hockey in Sweden. They do have a relegation system, so there's 4 tiers, I believe, and then the 4th tier has like sub tiers within it. But you have SHL, Hockey Allsvenskan, and then it's Hockey Enten or something like that. It's the 3rd tier, but it's pretty rare for guys to be coming out of that league anyways. It's usually Allsvenskan or SHL or one of the junior leagues like the J20 league, of course, which is where most Swedish draft eligible prospects come out of. Although, of course, again, Dvorsky is not Swedish. He is Slovakian, choosing to play in Sweden. But yeah, not a guy, again, that I've seen a lot of this season, but there is a ton of hype around Dvorsky. A lot of people right now in their like preliminary rankings have him in the top 5. Definitely a guy I will be keeping my eye out on and watching very closely. But he could go top 4, top 5, maybe. But again, that is yet to be seen. The next player I want to talk about is my favorite player so far that I've seen from this draft class, other than perhaps Connor Bedard, but I do really, really like this guy, and that is Zach Benson. Now, Benson played for the Winnipeg Ice this year on a very good team that included guys like Matthew Savoy and Connor Geekie, but I was really, really impressed by the way Zach Benson played this year. Now, I will say this, at 5'10", 150, he is probably the smallest guy. In fact, I'm almost certain he is the smallest guy on this list. And if you look at this picture of him here on Elite Prospects, this is from 2019, so it's a couple years old, but he looks like he's about 12 in that picture. It's kind of funny. And he does look like a small player. He is noticeably small when you see him on the ice. But again, he has a full another year to grow, maybe get a little bit taller, certainly add a little bit of weight. 150 is quite slight for an NHL prospect. But let's take a look at his stats here. He had 63 points in 58 games. And take a look at this, 23 points in 15 playoff games. That is really solid numbers. In the 2021 season, he had 20 points in 24 games as a double underager in the WHL. That is also very impressive. And quite frankly, I was more impressed by Zach Benson than I was by Connor Geekie. Those guys were largely playing on a line together this season. Benson was playing on Geekie's wing for most of the season. And I liked Benson more. I wasn't specifically taking notes on Benson since he wasn't draft eligible. I was, of course, focusing on Geekie and Savoy, which was enough of a task as it was already. But really, I'm not sure if I would have liked him more than Savoy or not. They weren't generally playing together as much or nearly as much as he was playing on the ice with Connor Geekie, so I had a little bit more of a direct comparison there. Really, to be honest, it kind of felt like Benson was driving a lot of the offense on that line. That's not to take away from Geekie. Geekie was definitely still adding a lot of value to that line and that team in general with his playmaking ability, but Benson was right there with him. And as an underager, you definitely have to give the edge to him, especially given the size difference between those guys. Geekie has a pretty significant size advantage with most players in a league like the WHL, and Benson does not, and he's still put up this level of production. What is there to say about him? I think he has a pretty good shot. I would say it is much better than Connor Geekie's. Very good skater, very mobile, much, much better skater than Connor Geekie. I'd say he's probably even a better skater than Matthew Savoy. A bit or at the very least, he projects to be by the end of his draft eligible season, in my opinion. He definitely has what it takes, I think, to be a very solid skater. And again, I think he's a pretty solid playmaker as well. This is another guy that I think has top 5 potential in the 2023 draft. Now, I mentioned earlier that this isn't really a rankings video, and it isn't, but these last 3 guys are definitely the top 3 in reverse order for me going into 2023 draft. So basically, my third overall at this point is hands down Adam Fantilli. He's listed at 6'3", 192 pounds. So again, pretty big boy. He is a centerman playing in the USHL this season, but he is going to the NCAA actually with Michigan, which is a little bit disappointing. I would honestly prefer to see him play in the USHL because he absolutely tore that league up, guys, this year. 74 points in 54 games, 37 goals, 37 assists, only 1 point in 3 playoff games, which is a little bit disappointing, but it is a small sample size. I didn't see any of those playoff games, so potentially could have been robbed. Maybe he had a little bit of an injury or something. I don't know. But in 2021, as a double underager, he had 36 points in 49 games. And what's honestly really kind of weird about this is that he had 18 goals and 18 assists. So even amount of goals and assists in his draft -2 season, even amount of goals at 37 and 37 assists as well in his draft -1 season. You go back 3 years, and he was playing U.S. high school prep, 18 goals, 18 assists, 36 points in 26 games. Again, even Steven, he's just remarkably consistent, really, with his goal scoring and his playmaking ability there. Now, in his draft -2 season, he did have 8 goals and an assist in 8 playoff games for 9 points. That is incredibly impressive as well. And what can I say about Adam Fantilli? He's an absolutely dominant junior level player. I suspect that's really why he chose to go to Michigan this season for his draft eligible season, because he will be playing against bigger, stronger competition, which will be a little bit more on par with both his physical size, because again, he's a bigger guy already, and his capabilities in general. So, yeah, this guy absolutely would have been the first guy off the board if he was eligible in this year's draft. I think definitely would have been the best player available, in my opinion. But that really just shows you how much talent there is at the top of this draft class. Again, I'm not commenting on whether or not the 2023 draft will be a particularly deep draft, but at the top, all 3 of these guys for sure I would have taken over Shane Wright, who I believed was the best player available. But Adam Fantilli still has a full another year to develop before he gets drafted, and this guy is going to be good, trust me. Now, moving on to the second guy here, the second overall ranking, I guess, going into the 2023 draft is Matvei Michkov. And you have probably heard about this guy. Maybe you haven't heard of Adam Fantilli. Maybe you haven't heard of those other guys. But you probably have heard of Michkov because he is doing some special things in Russia in the last couple of years. He is one of the smaller guys on this list at 5'10", 159. So relatively similar size to Zach Benson, although he didn't feel quite as short as Benson did in his games. Perhaps that's just my perception or the difference in like the camera angles from different leagues, but I digress. He didn't seem that short to me. And just looking at the top of his page here, you can see all these highlights. Hlinka Gretzky Gold, U18 Silver, most points at Hlinka Gretzky, World Junior Classics All-Star Team, Best Forward IHHF U18s, most points, MVP. I mean, he has a lot of hardware already as a draft -1 guy. He has an extremely good shot, guys. Better than anybody in this draft class, I think. Even Jagger Furcus. I hate to say it, but it's true. He played 22 games in the MHL this year with Scott St. Petersburg. 22 goals. Now, MHL goalies, again, not the most difficult guys to score on in the world, but 22 goals in 22 games as a draft minus one guy. That's pretty dang impressive. 38 points, 17 points in 17 playoff games. He played at the MHL level as well. 8 goals, 13 points in 6 games. That's insane for a guy who is 17. He probably would have been in 17 for most of those games, but again, December 9th birthday, he might have played a couple of those games as a 16-year-old. I'm not sure. And he also played some games in the KHL this year, 13 games, 2 goals, 5 points in 13 games as a draft minus 2 player. That is absolutely incredible. And then you go back to his previous years. That's his draft minus 1 season. But you go back to his draft minus 2 season, 52 points in 50 games at the MHL level, 4 points in 6. He had 54 points in 56 games at the MHL level. He got traded, I guess. I don't remember that happening, but this was a couple of years ago now. And then you look back the year before that as well in the Russian U16 league, 109 points in 26 games, 70 goals, absolutely ridiculous numbers. Yes, the Russian U16 league is not great. It's not even as good as the MHL probably, but this guy is just absolutely dominant. Probably the best pure goal scorer to come out of any draft since maybe Alex Ovechkin. Now, I say that partly because of the Russian factor, right? He is Russian. Definitely the best Russian goal scorer to come out of the draft since Ovi, probably. I'm really, really excited to see what this guy does next season. He'll probably be spending a lot of it at the KHL level, which is really exciting for a draft eligible player because the level of competition is a lot higher than the MHL. Although, to be honest, it would be fun to just see him score like 100 goals in the MHL in his draft season. That would be pretty funny. But for his development, it is probably better to be playing him in the KHL. He is a smaller guy. Maybe he'll get sent down to the MHL. I don't know if St. Petersburg has a VHL team. Some of the teams do, and some of them don't. So he didn't actually play any VHL games this season. So I'm not sure if that is an option for him. But either way, this guy, again, would probably be first overall in just about any draft class, except there is one other guy who just happens to be maybe even better. Now, this last guy is, of course, Connor Bedard. Now, I've zoomed in on him here so you guys can see some of these stats a little bit better as we scroll down to them. He's another center, and he is technically the smallest guy listed here at 5'9", 181 though, so he does have a lot of weight on guys like Zach Benson. He is definitely a small player for sure. I don't know that he necessarily looked quite that small. We'll see. We'll see what he gets listed at next year or how that updates and see if he gets any taller. If he does, great. If not, I don't think it's going to matter too much because this guy is just absolutely ridiculous. Here you can see his stats now. Hopefully my webcam isn't covering up any of that for you. As a draft -1 guy, 100 points in 62 games in the WHL. And let me tell you this, guys. Connor Bedard is the most dominant junior player I have ever seen. Now, I haven't been watching junior hockey for forever, but 100 points as a draft -1 guy, 51 goals, 49 assists. He's the most dominant player on his team in the league as a draft -1 guy. I mean, yes, there were overagers who were putting up more points than that. Guys like Logan Stankoven, I believe, had like 120 points or something. Or it might have been Wyatt Johnson in the WHL, whichever league it was. Those guys, put up more points as an overager, though. If you consider an overager putting up 100 points, like that is very common for guys who get drafted, who go back to juniors to put up like 100, 110 points or whatever in the WHL or OHL, whatever, or a Q, whatever league it is they're playing in. This guy's doing it as an underager, which is pretty unusual. And not only that, but you look at his draft -2 season, 28 points in 15 games, 12 goals, 16 assists. So basically 2 points per game. He actually scored at a higher rate than he did this year, which is absolutely mind-boggling. And the Regina Pats were not a great team, so it's not like he's getting fed by these absolute superstar prospect studs that are just feeding him for these great chances or having amazing finishing ability on the chances that he's setting up. He's doing it all, guys. You go back to draft -3 season, playing, I believe this is Canadian high school prep. I'm not really familiar at below major junior levels in Canada, but 84 points in 36 games in 1920, 88 points in 30 games in 1819, including 64 goals in Bantam. I mean, U15s. He's absolutely ridiculous. This is the best prospect that we've had since Connor McDavid. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, it is perhaps a bit unfair to make that comparison because people are going to be expecting nothing but pure greatness from him right from the get-go, especially considering he hasn't had his draft-eligible season yet, but I am extremely confident this guy is just going to put up absolute video game numbers in the WHL this season. I believe he is staying in the WHL with the Regina Pats. He was also the captain of Team Canada at the World Junior Classics, 7 points in 4 games as a 16-year-old. I mean, he hasn't even turned 17 yet. He's born on July 17th, 2005. This video will be going out on the 12th, so just a few days before his 17th birthday. That also does tell you a little bit about his size. He has the most time out of any of these guys to add more size to get taller. He already has the weight. Honestly, 181, that's a good weight for a guy who's 5'9". He's probably going to be growing still. He could easily hit 5'10", 5'11", 6 foot by the end of his draft class. And even when he gets drafted, he's still going to be one of the younger guys in the draft, which I generally like drafting younger players in general because you have a little bit more runway with them. So if you have two guys who have similar production and one of them is younger in the same league, then I would generally prefer the younger guy. But man, Connor Bedard, absolute hype train. Sign me up. I'm absolutely on Team Tank for Bedard. If your team is even remotely bad, you should probably consider tanking. I mean, it's not up to you guys. It's not up to me. I'm a Sharks fan, so there is a realistic chance that the Sharks do get a lottery pick and win it. The way it's looking, they're probably not going to be absolutely tanking, which they should be doing. They should have started tanking a while ago, but if they can win that first overall pick, guys, I'm going to be so absolutely elated. My other team's the Stars, so unfortunately I don't think they're going to be in the lottery next year. I think they're probably going to be a playoff team with some of the rookies they have coming in and some of the moves they're going to make. We'll see. But if you're a fan of any team like Chicago, Detroit, Arizona, Ottawa, maybe Buffalo, you should be absolutely 100% pure hype for this guy. And if you don't get him, you might get Michkov, and that is not a bad consolation prize. And if you don't get Michkov, you might get Fantilli, and that is not a bad consolation prize either. And if you don't get any of those guys, Zach Benson maybe, Dvorsky maybe, Yager, these guys are really, really good. I think you compare this year's the 2023 top 10 to the 2022 top 10. And I think there will be a pretty substantial difference there. But again, predicting the future, Not a great idea. I'm doing it anyways, though, because these guys are absolutely filling me with hype to the brim. But yeah, that will be it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you did believe it deserved a like, please do give it a like. That really helps me out. If you want to see a little bit more about the 2022 NHL draft class, I will leave a video about them on screen now, right below me. So if you want to watch that, go ahead, click on it. If not, that's okay too. But whatever you guys do, have a nice day.